What's up, y'all? It's Project Photography back with another video, and today Nikon just announced the new Nikon Z6 III, which is the successor to the Nikon Z6 II that was released back in 2020. And it's about time that they release a successor to that camera because it's gotten a bit outdated and there's so many new incredible features that they have now in the Z6 III. And as a landscape photographer, I ended up pre-ordering one, but you might be asking yourself why I pre-ordered this camera. And there's a few reasons for this. First of all, I've had my original Nikon Z6 since 2019. So that's about 5 years between pre-ordering the Nikon Z6 III and this camera, the original Nikon Z6. And I kind of felt like it was getting a bit outdated. And for me, I actually have two Nikon Z6s, and the other one I don't really show off on camera as much because the screen on the back is actually quite messed up. I picked it up as a second body a couple of years ago because I needed a exact same replica of the Nikon Z6, but I didn't want to pay an insane amount of money for a really good condition brand new one. And because it was in a bit of a beat up condition, I was able to get it for a bit cheaper. But now after all this time, I do want to replace it. And as much as I love the Nikon Z6, there's a few features that I think are really good about the new and improved Nikon Z6 III. A few of the features that I'm looking forward to in particular for the first one is the fully articulating screen. Now, this is not ideal for landscape photography. I would prefer to have a Nikon Z8 screen where it is able to go vertically and horizontally directly behind the camera, but I do prefer having a fully articulating screen over the two-way tilt of the Nikon Z6. You're able to see your camera when it's low to the ground in vertical orientation, and that's just a massive advantage for landscape photography. And after having used the Nikon Z30 with its fully articulating screen, I kind of realized that it actually is quite good for landscape photography. Of course, it's not perfect, but it is much better than a two-way tilting screen. The other element that I'm really happy with the Z6 III over something like the Z8 is the fact that we keep a mechanical shutter. Now, this may be a really weird feature to want to have on a Nikon Z6 III, but here's the thing. With a mechanical shutter, we're able to get better dynamic range, at least with the technology we have now. Electronic shutters simply do not have as good dynamic range relative to mechanical shutters. Another aspect that I really love is that the Z6 III is simply a Z6. I've always been a huge fan of the Z6 in terms of its design, its layout, and its price point. It is a lot cheaper relative to the higher megapixel bodies like the Nikon Z8. I've always been a huge believer that if you're going to get a second camera body, it should be very similar, if not identical, to your first camera body, because you don't want to have to switch between the two cameras and have to think, oh wait, this camera has these controls, this one has this one, and it's just not the exact same. It's a mess, and that's the last thing you want to think about. Luckily, the Nikon Z6 III appears to have the exact same layout, exact same controls as the original Nikon Z6, and that's a huge win for me as a landscape photographer. And on top of it, we actually do use the same batteries, so for me, who has an insane amount of Nikon Z6 batteries, EL15s I believe, we're able to just keep them and swap them over. And I want to go back and harp on the price point a little more because the Z6 III is actually a little more expensive relative to the original Nikon Z6 when it was announced. The original Nikon Z6 was about $2,000 versus the Z6 III is around $2,500. That is a pretty significant price jump. That's about 25%. But for me, I'd rather spend that versus spending $4,000 on something like a Z8. It just makes sense for me, and I'd rather use that money to invest into things like trips, for example. I'm really comfortable with the features that it can offer at that price point, which is a major reason why I'm sticking with the Nikon Z6. And we have a plethora of other features that I have not named yet. Like, for example, we have dual card slots, we have 15-minute exposure times, better EVF, better ergonomics, better build quality, and a feature that I am so incredibly excited to test, pixel shift. And for me as a landscape photographer, pixel shift is the feature I am most excited for. And it's a feature that I want to make an entire video off of while I'm testing the Nikon Z6 III. Because what pixel shift will allow us to do is use the IBIS in the camera to move around and capture about, I think it's 32 images. You can change how many images you want to capture, but essentially you can turn this 24 megapixel sensor into 96 megapixel images. Now, that is absolutely nuts. I mean, that concept by itself just changes the way that you can capture landscape photography. But you have to use some sort of external software that Nikon provides in order to stitch them. You can't just use something like Lightroom to go ahead and do that. But with a higher megapixel image, we should be getting better dynamic range and obviously better sharpness. And you can zoom in more, crop more, do whatever you want. This is huge because we can print it up much larger. And for me, I feel like this mitigates a lot of that need for having that higher megapixel sensor, because we can also shoot things like panoramas to increase that megapixel count. there's so many different options that we have at our disposal to get higher megapixel images with a 24 megapixel sensor, and pixel shift is just another avenue to be able to do that. I have to test pixel shift out as a feature because apparently it's not good when stuff is moving a lot, but there's also a few other elements I really want to test out when it comes to Nikon Z6 III. First of all is dynamic range. We are getting a partially stacked sensor, which is amazing for fast moving subjects like, let's just say you're shooting sports or you're shooting video and you want to mitigate that JëKo effect that a lot of electronic shutters have, and a partially stacked sensor should be able to mitigate it a bit. But that just gives me even more of a reason to test out things like dynamic range, because we just want to make sure that it is performing really well. And I think using the Nikon Z6 as a tester in order to see, okay, like what is the relative performance of the Z6 III, it'll provide a nice benchmark to make sure that the Z6 III is performing up to par when it comes to dynamic range. Now, an aspect of the Nikon Z6 III that Nikon says that they improved quite a bit is the ergonomics. Now, when I was looking at the Z6 III, I noticed that it is a bit larger and slightly heavier. I believe it comes in at around 750 grams relative to the 667 grams of the Nikon Z6. Now, that's not a huge difference, but again, it's something that I want to feel and test for myself, see how much of a difference that makes out in the field or just packing it in my bag. But we're also going to get deeper grips with the Z6 III, so these are just a few elements I want to go ahead and look out and test. And one of the last elements I really want to test out is that EVF. They said it is improved and a higher resolution. I believe it's about 5.7 million dots, but they said is a new improved EVF, and for landscape photographers, I think this is actually a really nice improvement to have. Because when we're out in the field, I mean, obviously a screen is quite nice, but if we want to check things like focus, or if it's really bright out and you can't see the back of the screen, that EVF is going to be our main option, especially check things like detail, zoom in, make sure everything is nice and sharp, and that EVF is going to be a great avenue to go ahead and do that. Of course, as I'm using the Nikon Z6 III, I'm sure there will be a plethora of other things that I go ahead and test out. But to me, when I'm kind of looking at it, those are the few things that really come into my head. But when it comes to the Nikon Z6 III, landscape photography is not the only reason I ended up picking up the Nikon Z6 III, and to be quite honest, landscape photography doesn't require insane specs in order to capture great images. But another major reason is actually for video, because let's be real, video is a major part of my imaging needs. Creating videos for this channel and honestly for my work, it just makes sense to upgrade my main video camera from the Nikon Z6 to the Z6 III, and there's a few main features that I really liked about the Z6 III. Again, that fully articulating screen for a full frame camera in particular is just absolutely massive. Being able to film myself, like right now I have the Z30 and I have a flip screen out just so I can see myself. On top of it, the resolution that we'd be able to record at, we can get 6K, I believe. We can also shoot 4K 120, so this also opens the door for me to shoot full 4K videos for you guys. Now, that isn't something I am going to do for sure, but that is definitely an option that I have in my back pocket if I ever wanted to. Another aspect is the image stabilization. I think they rated it for about 8 stops versus I think the Z6 is about 5. So that just means we're gonna get cleaner videos overall. And for me, when I'm filming, I only pretty much shoot handheld, especially for this channel. So having that better image stabilization is just gonna mean that we're gonna get cleaner B-roll overall, and I'm really excited to see how that is gonna look. And like I kind of mentioned before, we are getting that partially stacked sensor, which is gonna reduce a lot of banding, which is honestly for me kind of a big deal. I have to deal with banding a lot, and the fact that that's gonna be reduced is just absolutely massive for me. And of course, we're gonna reduce that JëKo effect, which when I'm shooting, especially at 120 frames per second for my B-roll, like I don't have to worry about it looking all weird and jello-y at the edges, and that's a huge deal for me. And for my imaging needs, this just makes so much more sense to upgrade from the Z6. But of course, with landscape photography, we are going to get a plethora of other features. And when it comes to review, I'm not going to be talking about the video features. This is a channel about landscape photography, so we're mainly just going to be talking about that. And now with the Nikon Z6 III being my main camera, it begs the question, what am I going to be doing with my original Nikon Z6? Well, I kind of mentioned that I have 2 of them, and so I'm going to be replacing the second one with the messed up screen and just beat up overall, because I've been wanting to get rid of that camera for a hot second now. Finally have the opportunity to do it. But with this Nikon Z6, my original one that I purchased back in 2019, I'm going to be keeping it, of course. And I told myself that even if I upgrade to a better camera, no matter how many times I do it, this is a camera that I'm going to be keeping forever. Like, this camera is my favorite camera of all time, and I've loved it ever since I bought it, and it's a big reason that I actually never upgraded. I saw the Z8, I saw the Z7 too, and I was like, like, I'm actually really happy with my Nikon Z6. So I am planning to keep it, and actually I'm planning to use it as the second camera body for the Z6 III. Even if the Z6 ends up being considered like a relic or a dinosaur, I'm still gonna keep it because I just love this camera so much, and it's just a reminder of why I love photography. It's not about the camera body, it's not about having the highest end specs, it's about the enjoyment of using the camera body solely for the sake of using it. And the Z6 is simply the embodiment of that. Also, my Nikon Z30 is a camera that I'm absolutely going to keep. I mean, again, for video, having that third camera body is amazing. And I actually want to use my Z30 as the telephoto body when I'm out shooting landscape photography, paired with my 28-400. I mean, that combo is just absolutely insane. And I am planning to do a 28-400 review soon. It's just the Z6 III kind of messed up the timing of that, so we're gonna have to wait for that just a little bit longer. The Z30 just hits so many different notes that these full frame Z6 and Z6 III now just don't hit. Obviously, it's a lot smaller. APS-C size camera sensor allows us to just get different focal lengths with these same lenses, and I'm just a huge fan of the Z30 overall. So for the most part, I'm going to be keeping my kit pretty much the same, just selling off that second Z6. And I know I can already hear it in the comments that, oh, the Z6 III is not meant for landscape photography, it's not ideal. Wouldn't you want something like a Z7 II? And by the way, I do think the Z7 II is the best camera body for landscape photography, but that's like a totally other topic for another video. But you imagine to yourself, okay, like, why the Z6 III? I really just love the Z6 form factor, and I know it's not ideal for landscape photography, it's not meant for it, but I love the Z6 line, and for me, like, it's simply a tool to be able to capture the images that I love, and if I'm able to use a camera body that I'm comfortable with, and I enjoy, and that I have more fun with, I am just gonna go ahead and go and get that camera, and that's what the Z6 III is for. Of course, I'm not using it to its fullest capabilities. I know the autofocus performance is insane, and honestly, I don't really mind. Of course, I love to have that souped up camera, but I'm gonna be using it for landscape photography and video, so that's just what I'm using it for. And I'm really excited to be going ahead and using the Z6 III. The first video that I posted that I was like super serious about going in on this channel was a review of the Z6, and I love the Z6 and I love this line, and I don't see myself moving off of it anytime soon, at least for my main camera body. So I'm really excited to be using the Z6 III, and if you have any questions about it, feel free to leave it in the comment section down below, and as soon as I get that camera, I'm going to be doing a first shoot and then a first impressions on it. So subscribe to stay tuned for that, and if you wanted to pre-order it, I actually have a link down in the description bar below that you can go ahead and use to pre-order the camera, so go ahead and do that if you wanted one. So thank you guys so much for experiencing the world with me today. Please feel free to rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.